Have you ever stumbled across a story online that hits you so hard it doesn't even feel like just some random post? Today I was scrolling through Reddit and found a few stories like that. Way too real, way too creepy to ignore. I've got a feeling you're going to want to hear these. So, no more waiting, let's dive right in.
Story 1.
It started with that strange email I received. It was some kind of job listing. It promised a straightforward payday, just logging and moving freight. It sounded good and was something I had experience in, so it seemed like an ideal match for the kind of work I needed. I had been recently laid off from my previous warehouse job, and the hours at the part-time gig I picked up afterward were abysmal. So, when the peculiar offer came from a company called PT Shipping and Logistics, a name I'd never come across before, I didn't hesitate. The opportunity to get back to good paying work was too appealing to pass up. I applied, and I didn't expect much to happen right away. But later that same afternoon, my phone buzzed with a new email notification. The subject line read, PT Warehouse Position, and my heart skipped a beat as I looked. The message was brief yet promising. They wanted to discuss the role further. The salary mentioned nearly made my jaw drop. It was nearly 3 times what I was making at my previous job. It felt almost unreal, but I tempered some of my initial excitement when I considered there must be some catch. Still, I decided to go in for the interview and learn more about the details behind such an enticing offer. The address led me to an industrial park on the edge of town. I pulled up to a nondescript gray building with only a small placard reading PT by the entrance. No windows, just concrete walls and a loading dock around the back. The parking lot was nearly empty, just 3 other cars despite it being the middle of a workday. I arrived about 15 minutes early for my interview. As I approached the entrance, an odd feeling of dizziness struck me. Something in the air maybe. I hoped there were no fumes or anything leaking out somewhere. I looked back to the door and it buzzed open before I could even reach for the handle. "You must be the applicant," a voice called from inside. A tall, thin man in a gray jumpsuit stood just beyond the threshold. "Right on time. We appreciate punctuality." I introduced myself properly and extended my hand, but he simply turned and gestured for me to follow. The interior was nothing like I expected. Instead of the bustling warehouse I'd imagined, the space was eerily quiet. A few fluorescent lights flickered overhead, illuminating rows of shipping containers and large wooden crates. No moving forklifts. No workers. Just silence. "Where is everyone?" I asked, my voice echoing slightly. "Shift change," the man replied without turning around. "You'll be working nights. Fewer distractions that way." We reached a small office at the end of a long corridor. Inside sat an older man behind a metal desk, his graying hair cropped short, his posture rigid even while seated. The nameplate on his desk read, PT, Supervisor Matt Branson. "This the new guy?" he asked, not bothering to look up from his paperwork. "Yes, sir, for the night shift position," the thin man replied before disappearing back down the hallway, leaving me alone with the man who I presumed would be my boss. "Sit," Matt said, finally glancing up. His eyes were hard, calculating, like he was assessing a piece of equipment rather than a person. I sat in the chair opposite him. I started to introduce myself. "Thank you for the opportunity. My name," but he cut me off. "I know your name, and I know you're thankful for a job. Here's how this works. I'm going to get right to the point, lay out what is expected, and that will be your chance to either take it or leave it." I was surprised by the bluntness of my apparent interview, but I nodded my head, and he continued. "You show up at 10 p.m. sharp. You load what needs loading. You unload what needs unloading. You don't ask questions about the cargo. You don't open anything. Ever." I hesitated, flustered by his tone. "Okay, but what exactly will I be?" "Handling specialized merchandise for high-end clients," he interrupted again. "That's all you need to know. The pay is good because discretion is mandatory." "Got it. Sure thing, boss man," I replied with a slight smirk, trying to mask my unease. His expression didn't change. "This isn't a joke, new guy. Break protocol, and there will be consequences, understood?" I nodded, swallowing hard. The smirk faded from my face. Crystal clear. "Good. I will assume that is a yes then. Welcome aboard." Matt slid a form across the desk. "Sign here, please." The The rest of the paperwork can wait for later. You start tonight. I scanned the document quickly. It was an unusually lengthy confidentiality agreement. My pen hovered over the signature line as a voice in my head screamed that something wasn't right. The whole "don't ask questions about what we are shipping" screamed as something illegal. But then I thought about my empty bank account, my overdue rent, and I signed. "Welcome to PT," Matt said without enthusiasm. He stood up and gestured for me to follow him. "I'll give you a quick tour." The warehouse was larger than it appeared from outside, with zones marked by colored tape on the concrete floor. Matt pointed to different areas with minimal explanation: inbound, outbound, staging, processing. Each section contained identical black shipping containers with no markings except for small barcodes. "What's in those?" I asked, gesturing to a row of containers. Matt's eyes narrowed, and I realized my mistake. "Right. Sorry." I mumbled apologetically. They really did take the confidentiality of the cargo seriously. As we walked toward the back, I noticed a large metal door with a keypad lock. Unlike the rest of the facility, this door had warning signs: authorized personnel only and environmental controls in effect. In that area, I couldn't help asking. Matt paused, as if assessing what he should say. "Storage," Matt said flatly. He squared his shoulders and turned to face me directly, his weathered face suddenly severe in the harsh fluorescent light. "Listen closely, because I'm only going to say this once. There are a few strict rules here at PT. Not guidelines, not suggestions, rules. Break them, and you're gone. No warnings, no second chances." I nodded, suddenly aware of how quiet the massive warehouse was. I still thought it was odd that no one else was around. Rule number 1, Matt raised a finger. Never, under any circumstances, open any of the boxes or shipping containers. I don't care if you hear noises coming from inside. I don't care if one starts leaking something. I don't care if the manifest says it contains gold bullion and the lock falls off in your hand. You do not open anything. If something is already open, you call me immediately. His eyes held mine, searching for any hint of defiance or misunderstanding. I nodded again, feeling a cold knot forming in my stomach. "Rule number 2, he continued, raising another finger. "All freight processing must be completed on schedule every night. The manifest will be on your workstation, and everything listed must be moved, sorted, and prepared before end of shift. No exceptions." A muscle in his jaw twitched. "If the work falls behind, breaks and lunches will be skipped. I've worked double shifts before, and I can assure you it's not pleasant." He walked a few paces, gesturing for me to follow. We passed by a row of strange equipment I couldn't identify, machines with dials and gauges that looked medical in nature rather than industrial. Rule number 3, maintain complete radio silence unless absolutely necessary. The equipment we use is sensitive to certain frequencies. Use the intercom system only if you urgently need to communicate with another worker. I glanced around, noticing for the first time the small black intercom boxes mounted at intervals along the walls. Rule number 4, Matt continued, his voice dropping slightly. Some areas of the warehouse are temperature controlled. The thermostats are preset. Do not adjust them for any reason, even if it feels unbearably cold or hot. The merchandise requires specific conditions. When I say cold, I mean cold. You might want to make sure you have a jacket or something warm. You're going to need it. We reached a metal door with a biometric scanner beside it. Matt placed his palm on the scanner, and a green light flashed. Rule number 5, he said, his tone becoming even more serious, if that was possible. At exactly 5 a.m., an alarm will sound. When you hear it, no matter what you're doing, no matter how urgent the task seems, you will immediately proceed outside through the emergency exit doors. Everyone must exit the building during this time. It's the only mandatory break of your shift, and it lasts precisely 15 minutes. Not 14, not 16. What's that about? I asked before I could stop myself. Matt's expression darkened. That's the company performing system checks. Nothing for you to worry about. He stepped closer, his weathered face just inches from mine. But understand this, if you're still inside after that alarm, I can't guarantee your safety. The way he said it sent ice through my veins. Not a threat, but a genuine warning. Whatever it was must be legitimately dangerous. I tried to ignore the sinking feeling I was getting and nodded my head. Got it, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Outside at 5 a.m. Matt nodded once, seemingly satisfied with my response, and he continued. Rule 6 concerns dealing with strangers or intruders on the premises. Should you detect anyone lingering here without proper authorization, you are to detain them if possible. If not, contact me immediately so I can alert our security lead. I know you might have reservations, so let me dispel them now. We are not engaging in any illegal activities here. Despite the peculiar hours and need for discretion, PT Shipping operates as a legitimate business. We own this building outright and possess all necessary business licenses. Our discretion protects our clientele, and Mr. Jaspin's work demands it, as does ours. As such, this is private property. Trespassing is strictly forbidden. Is that clear? I nodded briskly, suppressing the torrent of questions swirling in my mind, realizing it was unwise to voice them under his intense glare. He interpreted my silence as understanding and continued. Good. That is it. Keep to your job, don't ask questions, and get paid well. Now for your workstation. He led me to a small desk tucked between tall shelving units. A computer terminal, clipboard, and handheld scanner sat waiting. Next to them was a gray uniform with PT embroidered on the breast pocket. You'll work alone most nights, Matt explained. Occasionally there's another handler on shift, but don't count on the company. Handler? I repeated. Is that my job title? Matt's jaw tightened. Product handler. That's what you are. He checked his watch. I've got to go. Your first shift starts at 10 p.m. Don't be late. As he turned to leave, I noticed something strange, a dark stain on the concrete floor near one of the shipping containers. It looked like someone had tried to clean it up, but hadn't quite managed to remove it completely. One more thing, Matt called over his shoulder. Stay away from the containers marked with red tags. Those are priority shipments for Mr. Jaspin himself. I will handle those, and if I am unavailable, leave them unless absolutely necessary to get them out on time. With that, he disappeared through a side door, leaving me alone in the cavernous space. The silence was absolute now, broken only by the distant hum of what sounded like industrial refrigeration units. I picked up the gray uniform and examined it. Standard work clothes, but the material felt oddly stiff, almost like it had been starched beyond reason. My shift didn't start for hours, so I decided to head back home and force myself to get some sleep. It was going to be a long fist night, and I had to get used to becoming a night owl. I did not sleep much and got back to work a few minutes before 10 p.m. The place was unnerving at night. The outside was barely lit, and I almost tripped several times just walking from the parking lot to the main building. I stepped in and saw that at least it was brighter inside. I made it to my station, and I saw a new inventory log, and as I was reading it, I nearly dropped it to the ground when someone tapped me on the shoulder and startled me. I spun around and saw a woman, mid-40s maybe, with prematurely gray hair pulled back in a severe bun that looked painfully tight. Dark circles hung beneath her eyes, and she regarded me with a clinical detachment that made me feel like a specimen under glass. "You must be the new guy," she said flatly with no introduction. She wore a dark jumpsuit and heavy steel-toed boots that looked like they could crush concrete. "Yeah, that's me," I replied, trying to calm my racing pulse. "And you are?" She sighed, as if my simple question had already exhausted her patience. "Gene, inventory lead." She glanced at my uniform, which I'd changed into before arriving. "At least you dress properly. The last guy showed up in sneakers. Didn't last a week." The way she said it made me wonder what had happened to him, but I decided not to ask. "Matt gave you the rules?" She didn't wait for my confirmation before continuing. "Good. Follow them to the letter. I've been here 7 years. There's a reason for that." Jean moved with an efficiency of motion that spoke of someone who never wasted energy. She pulled a tablet from a nearby shelf and tapped the screen a few times. "First truck is due soon," she said, checking her watch. "Your job is to help me unload, check the manifests, and get everything sorted according to protocol." She handed me the tablet. "Tonight's a quiet one. Only 3 shipments. Not much to load up either. Pay attention because you'll be doing a lot of this by yourself in the near future, and also because I don't like repeating myself. I nodded my head and examined the manifest. Most entries were coded with alphanumeric sequences that meant nothing to me, but the quantities and timestamps were clear enough. What are we shipping exactly? The question slipped out before I could stop myself. Jean's eyes flicked to mine, then away. She sighed again, deeper this time. What did Matt tell you about questions? Right. Saw the... Look, she said, her voice dropping slightly. I get it. You knew. You're curious. Natural human response. She leaned closer. But trust me when I say curiosity is actively discouraged here. Not just by management. Something in her tone sent a chill down my spine. Before I could respond, a buzzer sounded, indicating a truck had arrived at the loading dock. That's our cue, Jean said, straightening up. Follow me. Do exactly as I do. Nothing more, nothing less. We walked to the loading dock where a large black semi had backed up to the platform. Unlike any delivery truck I'd seen before, this one had no company logo, no DOT numbers, nothing to identify it. Just pure matte black, even the license plates. The driver remained in the cab, engine idling. Jean approached the back of the truck and entered a code on a keypad. The rear door swung open silently, revealing a cargo area that seemed impossibly dark despite the loading dock's harsh lights. Stand back, Jean instructed, positioning herself to the side of the opening. I did as told, watching as she pressed another button on the wall. A mechanical whirring filled the air, and a platform extended from the dock into the truck's interior. What happened next defied explanation. The darkness inside the truck seemed to ripple, like heat waves rising from asphalt on a scorching day. Then, as if pushed by invisible hands, 3 large containers slid out onto the platform. They weren't standard shipping crates. These were sleek black boxes about 7 feet long and 3 feet wide, with no visible handles or seams. Each bore only a barcode and a small digital display showing a temperature reading. 2 displayed a normal room temperature, but the third read minus 15 degrees Celsius. That one goes to cold storage immediately, Jean said, pointing to the frigid container. I'll handle it. You log the other 2. As she maneuvered the cold container onto a special card, I approached the remaining boxes with the scanner in hand. The moment I got close, I felt a terrible ringing in my ears. Then an odd, sort of buzzing, like a bee has flown down into my inner ear. I could have sworn I heard a faint scratching sound as well. I froze, scanner hovering in midair. Problem. Jean called from several feet away, her voice sharp. I thought I heard. She was already frowning at me. Nothing, I quickly stated, shaking my head. Just getting used to the scanner. Jean's eyes narrowed slightly, lingering on me a moment too long. Scan them and move on. We're on a schedule. I ran the scanner over the barcodes, tried to ignore the odd buzzing near the box. The scanner beeped confirmation, and the tablet in my other hand automatically updated with the shipment details. Now what? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Now we move them to staging, Jean said, returning from cold storage. Zone B for these. Follow me. I helped her push the cart with the 2 remaining containers through the warehouse. The wheels squeaked slightly on the concrete floor, the sound echoing in the cavernous space. As we rolled them into place, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not the only ones there. Listen, Jean said abruptly, after we'd positioned the containers. She sighed, rubbing her temple with 2 fingers. I don't usually bother with the new people. Most don't last. But you seem... She paused, searching for the right word, less stupid than some. So she looked around, ensuring we were truly alone. When the 5 a.m. alarm sounds, be the first one out the door. Don't dawdle, don't finish just one more thing. And whatever you do, don't look back at the building. I swallowed hard. Why not? Because some things can't be unseen, she said flatly. And because I've outlasted 3 full crews by minding my own business and following protocol to the letter. You are here now. The pay is good. If you don't ask questions or get any ideas, you will be fine. Everyone else that has been let go has done something stupid. Keep your head down and your mouth shut, for your sake and everyone else's. The buzzing sound grew slightly louder. Jean didn't seem to notice, or was pretending not to. What's actually in these? I whispered, nodding toward the container. Jean's face hardened. You really don't listen, do you? But something in her expression shifted, almost imperceptibly. She leaned in close. The Proud Tailor deals in specialized merchandise. That's all you need to know. The Proud Tailor? I thought this was PT shipping and... PT, she cut me off. The initials. Figured out. She tapped her temple with one finger. Mr. Jaspin expects his shipments to arrive in perfect condition. Our job is to ensure that happens. Nothing more. Before I could ask who Mr. Jaspin was, the intercom crackled to life. Jean, report to receiving. The second shipment is arriving early. It was Matt's voice, sounding groggy but no less irritable. Jean straightened immediately. Got it. She turned to me. Finish logging these two, then meet me at the receiving dock. Don't touch anything else. With that, she strode away, her boots making barely any sound on the concrete floor. I glanced at the manifest on the tablet. The description field for these containers simply read, Display units, fragile, temp sensitive. My hand hovered over the container's surface. No locks were visible, just a seam around the middle where it presumably opened. The rules were clear, never open anything. Yet the curiosity in that moment was overwhelming. I started to get morbid ideas. What if this was some kind of human trafficking operation? The silhouette of the boxes was ghoulish. As I stared down at the box, my mind raced with more possibilities, and the desire to know grew stronger. Suddenly, the intercom crackled, breaking my morbid musings. New guy, where are you? Second shipment's waiting. Matt's voice echoed through the warehouse, impatience evident. I quickly tapped a response into the container manifest, marking it as processed, and hurried toward receiving. Whatever was happening here, whatever was in those boxes, I needed more information before I did anything stupid. Jean's warning echoed in my mind. Curiosity was actively discouraged. Now I understood why. I arrived at the loading dock just as the next truck rumbled its way into the bay. This one appeared more typical than the first, its worn exterior a familiar sight. Most of the freight was neatly packed into standard-style shipping containers, their metal sides marked with destination labels and handling instructions. The sight of these ordinary items eased the tension I felt earlier. Jean quickly scanned through the manifest, her eyes darting from line to line. Meanwhile, I maneuvered our small yellow forklift to offload the unassuming cargo. It was a few more hours of moving boxes, and almost everything had been stowed away and logged properly. I was just finishing another trip when I heard a loud alarm sound. I noticed it was nearly 5 a.m., and I almost tripped over myself to run out of there. The loading bay lights pulsed in sync with the blaring siren, each flash amplifying the urgency in the air. I reached the door, breathless, just as Jean appeared at my side. Her pace was brisk, purposeful, as she kept her eyes locked on the exit, not sparing a single glance behind. We both pushed through the emergency exit door into the pre-dawn darkness. The cool morning air was nice, clearing the warehouse fog from my mind. Jean kept walking until she reached the edge of the parking lot, where she stopped and lit a cigarette with practiced motions. I followed, watching as a few other workers I hadn't seen during my shift emerged from different exits around the building. None of them looked at each other or at the building. All of them kept their eyes fixed on the ground or on distant points in the darkness. You did good, Jean said as I approached, exhaling a cloud of smoke that hung in the still air. Most newbies have to be reminded about the 5 a.m. drill. What's really happening in there? I whispered, unable to help myself despite all the warnings. Jean took another long drag and sighed heavily. System maintenance, she said flatly, but there was something in her tone that suggested she didn't believe her own words. That's bullshit, and you know it, I whispered, making sure none of the other workers could hear us. She turned to me, her eyes hard in the dim light of the parking lot lamps. Listen carefully. There are things that happen in this job that defy explanation. I've learned it's better for my sanity, safety, and continued employment to accept the official answers. A strange sound cut through the pre-dawn stillness, something between a mechanical whine and a muffled scream. It seemed to come from inside the building, but it was unlike anything I'd ever heard before, organic yet mechanical, pained yet precise. I instinctively turned toward the sound. Jean's hand shot out, gripping my arm with surprising strength. "Don't," she hissed, her fingers digging into my flesh. "Don't go back. Don't even look back at the building during maintenance." I forced my gaze away, focusing instead on the cigarette between Jean's fingers. The ember glowed orange in the darkness, hypnotic in its simplicity. "How long have you worked here?" I asked, trying to distract myself from the sounds that continued to emanate from the building, sounds that seemed to be growing in intensity. 7 years, 2 months, 16 days, she replied without hesitation. Longest anyone's lasted besides Matt. "Who was Mr. Jaspin? You mentioned him earlier." Jean's expression flickered with something that might have been fear. "The owner of the Proud Tailor. He visits occasionally to inspect special shipments." She took a final drag of her cigarette before crushing it under her boot. "If you ever see a tall, thin man in an expensive suit, stay out of his way. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't make eye contact unless he initiates it. He likes to chat, and if he likes chatting with you, well, you might get the wrong kind of attention." I considered what she said and wondered why someone who owned a tailoring store would need a shipping operation like this. For a second, I laughed at the idea of the secret things in the boxes being knockoff jeans or other cheap clothes that we were moving just to avoid customs and state taxes. Whatever was in those black boxes, though, sure didn't feel like clothes. Another sound pierced the air, this one a high-pitched whine that made my teeth ache. Several of the other workers winced visibly, clutching their ears. One man, standing close to the door, suddenly fell to his knees, his face contorted in a silent scream. Then, as suddenly as it began, the sound stopped. A heavy silence fell over the parking lot, broken only by the distant call of an early bird and someone's ragged breathing. 1 minute left, Jean announced, checking her watch. "Everyone remember where you were working. We aren't done yet." I stared at her, a cold knot forming in my stomach. "Jean, what the hell is going on in there?" Those sounds, they weren't machinery. She didn't answer, her eyes fixed on her watch. The other workers had formed a loose line near the doors, like actors waiting for their cue to return to stage. 30 seconds, Jean called out. I grabbed her arm. "I can't go back in there without knowing what." 10 seconds, she interrupted, shaking off my grip and hissing back at me. "Get in line or they will notice." The implication was clear. I hurried to join the others, just as a different alarm sounded. 3 short beeps that seemed to signal the all clear. The workers filed back inside through the same doors they'd exited, their movements mechanical, rehearsed. Jean waited for me at the entrance. "Back to your station," she instructed. "Act normal. Whatever you think you heard, forget it." I followed her inside, fighting every instinct that screamed for me to run. The warehouse appeared exactly as we'd left it. Containers neatly arranged, equipment powered down, paperwork stacked on desks. But something had changed. The air felt heavier somehow, charged with an energy that made the hair on my arms stand on end. As I walked back to my station, I noticed something on the floor that hadn't been there before, a fine white powder, almost like plaster dust, trailing from the door marked "Authorized personnel only" to the loading dock. And near one of the containers we'd processed earlier, a small dark stain that looked disturbingly like blood. The rest of the shift passed in a blur of activity. We loaded a small outgoing truck, and for some reason Jean had me log the shipment but would not let me help load the boxes on board. By the time 7 a.m. rolled around, we were done and our replacements had arrived. 2 stone-faced men who acknowledged us with nothing more than curt nods. I followed Jean to the employee break room, where she retrieved a worn leather bag from her locker. "First night's always the hardest," she said, not unkindly. "You did okay." "Jean," I said, lowering my voice even though we were alone. "I can't keep working here without some answers. Those containers and those sounds during the maintenance. Something is seriously wrong with all this, isn't there?" "Stop," she cut me off sharply. "Just stop right there." Jean's eyes darted to the security camera in the corner of the locker room. She grabbed my arm with surprising strength and pulled me closer. "Not here," she whispered, her breath hot against my ear. "Meet me at Denny's on Highway 16. 1 hour. With that, she shouldered her bag and walked out, leaving me standing alone in the sterile locker room. I stared at my reflection in the small mirror above the sink. Pale face, dark circles forming under my eyes, a haunted look I didn't recognize. Just what the hell had I gotten myself into?
Story 2.
The preacher's body slowly swung left to right in the church entrance, now blocking my exit. His whispering continued, "What questions do you have? What do you want to know? Aren't you curious to know what's going on?" And what were the smiling deer that always tried to eat me? What was with the residents of the town? Why did the moon hunt? And where did it go at the end of every day? Though something was off, why did the book never mention this hangman? What was he doing out here in the church? And what was with this church? No crosses, no Bibles, not even a statue of Jesus, just pews, a preacher stand, and the preacher hanging in the entryway. I first needed to collect information, uttering my first question, "Who are you?" Immediately my body was racked with pain, as if all my pores felt as if they were being slightly opened too wide. I could feel little drops of blood appearing all over my body, staining my clothes a crimson red. I gasped, falling to the floor in pain, much to the giggling of the hanged man. Me? No one has asked that question before. For that I'll give you 2 questions on the house. I'm the preacher of Fredericksburg, guiding the residents to a promising future. You can either follow my teachings or return home, or what's left of it anyway. My knees on the floor, body still pulsating in pain, I wondered what my next freebie question would be. Should I ask about what he meant by my world and what's left of it? Do I just risk it? How bad could my world be compared to this one? Though as time goes on, I've been feeling my memories fade away. I know I received this book from someone and winded up here, but who was it and why? I sat there, frozen in thought, the silence of the church being broken by screaming coming from outside. The screaming roosters were out, pretending to be my family again. I had an hour to get back to the cabin, back to the closest thing I can call home, knowing I may regret it. But I had to know who was the person that gave me the book and why. Despite the darkness, I could see a grin appearing on the preacher. I'm surprised you don't remember the face of your own brother, though he came into this very same church demanding for a way to have his place taken by you. I sat there in shock, trying to remember the faces of my family, their hobbies, the times we spent together, and yet nothing could come to mind. I remember their voices, yet nothing else. Once again, an answer to my question ended up with me having even more questions, though every minute I spent here thinking about it, the less likely I'd be able to make it home. Looking at the grinning preacher, I asked him a question I originally came here for. How do I escape the town of Fredericksburg? The grin faded from the preacher, and with an angry voice he spoke, "Fine, though don't come crawling back once you find out what has happened to your world. Though remember, once you start, you can't stop the process. First, you'll need to return to the school and reclaim the memories you gave up to come here. Second, fuel up and begin leaving the town through the town exit. You'll know where when the time comes. You'll be driving a while, and if you wind up without any gas, be ready to become the shadows you see around town. Finally, you'll reach the gate, bring the book, and pass the gift of Fredericksburg to a new worthy body. Now get out. You don't have much time before the moon finishes its blink." I wanted to ask more what happened to my world. Why did my brother send me here? What was the book? But I knew I wouldn't be able to survive the payment, again to ask another question. I thanked the preacher for the information he gave me. As I left, I heard him mumble, "It's not too late to join the residents. It's a better future than what awaits you." I opened my car door, turned on the engine, and started my departure from the church, the answers for my questions swimming in my mind. What was going on? Should I stay in this nightmare realm? Was the preacher right in joining whatever the hell was in the buildings around town? Driving down the road with deflated tire didn't help at all, though I made it into town without too many issues besides bent rims. Darkness began falling on the town as the moon slowly began closing its eyelid, and that's when I noticed it. The gas light. Turns out 2 gallons wasn't enough to make it home, leaving me a choice. Sprint to the cabin, hoping I'll avoid the monsters of the town, or take my chances in town and experience what happens in the darkness of the night. I proceeded to the only gas station in town the book told me was safe. Maybe I could shop for 10 hours, and make it through the night. My car, grinding to a halt in the parking lot, I made my way, entering the gas station store. The gas station attendant this round was not covered in spiders at least, though I have a feeling most gas station attendants are supposed to have their eyes, ears, and shouldn't be eating the brains out of skull as if it was pudding. "How's it going? Can I shop around for a while?" I asked. "Of course," the attendant said with a coarse throat. "Though if a resident finds you here, I'll need some payment to not give you up. They're very thirsty."
Story 3.
It would be a lie to say I grew up wanting to be a priest. My father would take my sisters and me to church every Sunday, whether it was snowing or blisteringly hot. We always went. While my sisters were off finding their husbands, I was growing in the faith and spent more time praying than socializing. However, I was still hesitant when my father told me I should attend a seminary school after graduation. It was not exactly the most thrilling prospect as a 17-year-old kid, but after some thought that summer, I decided to give it a shot. It would be the best and worst decision of my life. Once I was fully ordained, I was dispatched to a corner of the globe that had drifted away from the church. I ended up in a town on the Atlantic coast of Newfoundland called Blythe. It was a small, isolated fishing town whose main claim to fame was the rumored existence of a nearby Viking landing site. I knew it was my calling when I learned it had previously been host to a Catholic church. However, after it burned down in the early 1800s with a priest inside, there was never any attempt to rebuild it. On my first visit to Blythe, I found the remains of the old church buried deep in the woods outside of town. There was barely anything left besides the cellar and some large logs still blackened by flames. It would be easy to clear the rubble and build my new church atop where the old one once stood. Luckily, I was given sufficient funds by the Vatican for this undertaking. The locals were leery of me initially, since not many outsiders came through their neck of the woods. On this first visit, I tried my best to introduce myself to as many people as possible, but sadly, my trip ended before I could make any real progress. I did, however, pay a group of workers to begin constructing the new church before I left. On my second trip, the locals were more receptive to my presence. Several people approached me, asking about the church, faith, and me personally. Frankly, I wasn't expecting this kind of reception after my last visit, but there was one encounter that stood out. I was visiting the construction site. The sun was getting low, and the workers were packing up for the day. Most of the framing had been done, and I took great pleasure walking through the hollow interior, imagining what it would look like finished. That was when one of the workers approached me. "Excuse me, Father?" he asked, taking off his hard hat. "Yes." I would come to find out his name was Jonathan Heathstead. He stood there and scratched his head like he wasn't sure what to say next. Do you believe in demons?" he asked. "Yes, I sure do. But do you believe in them?" I don't know what you're asking," I said. Jonathan paused for a long second before speaking. Never mind. At the time, I didn't think too much about this interaction. Looking back, I should have. On my third visit, I brought 2 suitcases and my cat Spots. I was finally moving to Blythe. The church was finished, at least as finished as a church in the backcountry could be. I was proud of it. I was so excited that I opened the doors to all visitors that first day. I was already greeting nearly 24 people before I even had a chance to unpack. While that might not seem like many, every pew was filled in that small church. There was one man, however, who wasn't sitting. He was standing in the back watching me as I gave my little sermon and invited the crowd to attend that Sunday's Mass. After everyone filed out, he approached me. It was Jonathan. I could hardly recognize him. He looked tired, with dark bags under his eyes and a long, disheveled beard. His clothes looked 2 sizes too big, and it took me a moment to recognize they were the same clothes he was wearing the day I'd met him. "Father," he croaked, his voice harsh and dry. "Do you have a moment?" I paused, unsure how to react. "I need help," he said with tears welling in his eyes. While I was ready to listen to him talk about losing a loved one or going through a nasty divorce, I wasn't ready for what he ended up saying. I ushered him to the first row of pews, and we sat for a few minutes before he started talking. "Father, do you believe in the devil?" he asked. "Yes, of course." "Do you believe he walks among us?" "Sadly, I do." He exists in the hearts of men everywhere. Jonathan paused, more tears spilling down his cheeks. I became acutely aware of the smell of fresh lumber at that moment. Strange what you notice in the silence between words. I believe the devil has his grip on me, he whispered. What makes you think that, my child? Jonathan took a long, steadying breath before he spoke again. I don't know why, but I've started to do things. What things? I pressed. I black out sometimes. Sometimes only for a few minutes, but other times for whole days. When I wake, sometimes I come to, and I'm waist deep in the ocean on the brink of the abyss. Others I am bare-chested and covered in bee blood. Normally I'm outside, on a rock, or up a tree. But sometimes I am in the basement of my house, scribbling like a madman with chalk and blood. Whose blood is it? I don't know. Sometimes I swear it's fish blood, others I am not too sure. Our dog went missing a few weeks ago. I don't know. Jonathan broke down, sobbing into his hands. I noticed they were slightly stained red. Father, I need help. Please. Now, the church has had controversy with mental illnesses being conflated with possession. So to say I wasn't exactly reaching for my cross and Bible over what this man was telling me would be an understatement. Let me consult with my superiors, I said, patting him on the back. They will surely know what the best course of action is. Father, I need help now. Yes, I know, but I'm limited in what I can do right now. Jonathan's face immediately sobered up, and a flash of rage shined in his eyes. Tears still rolled down his cheeks as he stood up and stormed out of the church. Go in peace, I called out after him. God protects all of his children and gives us strength. Jonathan paused halfway through the door and turned back to me. Then I am no child of God, he said before slamming the door shut. I sat in the empty church for a while, considering what had just happened. My welcome to the town had gone smoothly so far, but I was afraid, after how that confession went, that I might not be up to the task. Spots jumped up on my lap and started purring. It put me at ease, and the rest of the evening went smoothly. I had no way of knowing that night Jonathan would enter his basement and never emerge again. It was a closed casket funeral, a small, intimate affair, even though I am sure half the town showed up. It was there that I met Marie, Jonathan's widow. A few days after the funeral, I decided to stop by the new widow's home. I didn't feel it was appropriate to crowd around her at the funeral or to simply ignore her. My motivation wasn't entirely altruistic. A selfish part of me wished to wash my hands of the guilt that had weighed on me since I got the news. When Marie answered the door, it was obvious she'd been crying. Her eyes were red and puffy, and her nose was almost rubbed raw. Good evening, Father. What can I do for you? She asked. I just wanted to stop by and offer my condolences, I said. She opened her mouth and closed it several times. Would you like to come in? She said, biting back tears. I would appreciate some guidance. Marie led me inside to a small, two-person dining table in the kitchen. Coffee? She asked. That would be great. Her hand was shaking as she grabbed 2 mugs from the cupboard. Father, she started, do you believe in demons? Now, I like to believe I'm a rational man, but I would be lying if I said that question didn't immediately make me feel sick to my stomach. Yes, of course. Can I make a sane man do what Johnny did? She asked, placing the mug of old coffee in front of me before sinking into the opposite chair. What did Jonathan do? I don't know. He told me he was having nightmares, but I didn't think they were all that serious. I mean, who would? What was I supposed to do? My child. I placed my hand on her wrist. What did Jonathan do? Marie wiped at her nose and looked at the basement door. He came home late and he was sweating like crazy. I got him water and he seemed to settle down. We went to bed and she broke down but quickly composed herself. I found him down there that morning. The sheriff took his body and some photos, but it was clear it was self-inflicted. The door was locked from the inside. He told me I get to be the one to clean it up, but I haven't opened that door since that morning. I am sorry. Why, Father? Why did this happen? I don't know. What should I do? I don't know, I sheepishly said. Marie stood up and walked over to the window. You haven't touched the basement? I asked. No, not yet. Let me help. It's the least I can do. Marie led me to the basement door. She didn't open it. only nodding towards the doorknob before shuffling back to the dining table. The door whined as it swung open, revealing nothing but a curtain of darkness just past the threshold. A distinct metal tinge hung in the air and stuck on my tongue. I rolled up my sleeves and whispered a quick prayer. Each step creaked as I descended into the darkness. I didn't know what to expect, but it wasn't what was down there. I pulled on the light cord. It was an unfinished basement with low beam ceilings and concrete floors. A desk was pushed aside with a rug rolled up and stored on top. It made a clearing in the middle of the basement. It was red everywhere, streaks and drops, smears across the floors and on the walls. A tinge of rusting iron hung in the air. Among the streaks, there were broken fingernails and scraps of skin. It made me feel weak. At first, there was no pattern to the madness. Just intersecting lines and circles, hard angles, and jagged scribbling. My head was spinning, and I stumbled back to the stairs. I sat for a while, staring at the self-inflicted carnage when it finally started to form. It was a single, massive rune, or at least something like a rune. It was surprisingly intricate, with large smears making up the border with smaller drops and streaks for finer details. I took several pictures of the rune from every possible angle. I didn't know what I would do, but I still felt I should document it. It took a few hours to clean up the blood. Even after cleaning, the floor was still stained red. "God be with you," I said, standing on the house's front step. "It always gets better with time." Marie didn't say anything as she slowly closed the door. Several months passed, and I had settled into a routine. The buzz around the new church had died down, and there was regular attendance during Mass. While it wasn't the most exciting place to be, Blythe and the surrounding countryside had started to grow on me. With the coming of fall and the changing of leaves, I found myself outside more and more. The forest behind the church could have well been endless. The locals had carved hiking paths through the trees, and several fallen logs made excellent benches. I hadn't seen or heard anything about Marie since I visited her house that night. Rumor was that she had secluded herself and was living as a hermit, barely leaving her house. Who could blame her? Since that night, I haven't looked at the photos I took. There was no need to. They were seared into my memory. I thought about that night regularly on my walks through the woods. There was one tree that was my turning point for my walks. Rumor has it that it was a lone survivor of the region's old-growth forest. I say this as a man of God. I understand why ancient peoples believe these great things to be gods themselves. It was after one of these hikes that I found a note folded up and slid under the door. It was written in handwriting so heavy it pierced the page a few times. It simply read, "Help." While it was a bit of a stretch, I presumed the note was from Marie. After all, who else would it have been from? She just needed help after Jonathan passed away. Oh, how wrong I was. It was getting late, but I made the trek out to her house that night. The house sat on the outskirts of town, overlooking the ocean. Once I reached the front door, the sun had already set and the insects had started singing their tunes. I was about to knock when I realized the door was already open. "Mrs. Heathstead," I called out. Nothing but the darkness of the house answered. The door let out a low creak as I pushed it open. "Mrs. Heathstead, are you here?" No response. I stepped inside, the floorboards moaning under my feet. "Mrs. Heathstead, are you there?" I was about to turn back when I heard a faint sobbing coming from the basement. The basement door was slightly ajar, inky darkness on the other side. I took a step closer. The sobbing suddenly stopped. I heard whispering coming from the basement. "What did you say?" "Mrs. Heathstead." The voice that responded was raspy and almost indiscernibly quiet. "There's a man at the top of the stairs." I took a step closer, my heart pumping in my ears as the voice spoke again. And another in the basement. Screaming echoed from the basement. The inky darkness was dispelled as orange flames burst from the basement. I fell back, barely avoiding a burst of flames that licked at the place I was just standing. Scrambling to my feet, I barely got out of the doorway before the door slammed shut. By what force, I don't know. It was only for the briefest of moments, but for a second, I thought something was staring at me from the window. As I blinked, the windows exploded in flames, sending shards of glass flying in every direction. The Heathstead house burned down in less than 5 minutes. It took nearly double that for the first men carrying hoses to respond. I stared at the flames, my clothes and hair singed. The flames swirled and licked the night sky. The sheriff seemed just as confused and disturbed as I was when I gave my statement. Whether this was because he believed me or didn't, I don't know. I was still an outsider after all. A couple died so soon after I arrived. Even the most trusting man would be suspicious. It was eventually ruled as self-inflicted. It is easier to believe that a grief-stricken widow would choose to end her pain than for it to be the work of the devil. I don't know what I saw in that window. If I saw anything in that window. I like to believe I am a reasonable man as much as I am a holy one. But after that night, I find myself struggling for answers. All I know is the devil is real, and I fear he is here in Newfoundland. That's it for today's creepy Reddit tales. Before we go, I just want to say a quick thanks to all of you for watching, liking, and sticking around. You guys keep this channel going, and I'll be back soon with more stories that'll make your skin crawl. Drop a comment if you've got your own spooky tale to share, and I'll see you in the next one.